There is a way to avoid feeling anxious and fearful. Based on science and spiritual teachings, we know why we feel such things and how to end it. We have these difficult feelings because we struggle with life. Accepting life in each moment transforms this. When we accept what is happening, two things occur. We no longer feel anxious and fearful, and we are poised to respond wisely to life. It can also open access to portals for seeing your true nature. The Buddha discovered how struggling with the present moment causes dukkha, which is often translated as suffering. Recent neuroscience research and evolutionary knowledge have confirmed this. Craving and aversion is struggle, and this is the heart of the Buddha's first noble truth, and it's the opposite of accepting the present moment. We have all had the experience of non-struggling or acceptance of the moment. It might be a moment of awe when you see a sunset, or a moment when you're focused on playing an instrument or playing a sport. It could be when you behold your newborn baby. In these moments of total acceptance, there's peace, and it opens a portal to seeing reality as it is. Why do we struggle? There are psychological, neurological, and evolutionary reasons for why we struggle. The Buddha didn't have the science and the brain scanning tools, the functional MRIs and such, to examine the neurological and evolutionary aspects. He was able to study the psychological aspects. Now recent neuroscientists like Richard Davidson, Rick Hansen, Sharon Begley, and Sarah Lazar, just to name a few, have researched the neurological and evolutionary aspects of why we struggle, and even how to address it using mindfulness. We are wired for survival and reproduction, and this requires desire and aversion. In other words, struggle. Sometimes we also struggle to get a hit of pleasure, so this just reinforces the pattern. And our economy encourages struggle. Just look at how we are encouraged to get more things with the promise of happiness. We all have these evolved mechanisms for survival and reproduction which cause us to struggle. For example, our brains have a built-in negativity bias that leads to suffering, whereas we're constantly scanning our environment for threats, thereby creating kind of this background feeling of anxiety. Brain has a bias towards negative unconscious memories, even though most of our memories are positive. In addition, our brains continually create simulations about what could go wrong or what imaginarily did go wrong in the past, and this creates more mind-made suffering. And to top it all off, we have this thing called the default mode network, which produces self-referential thoughts in a sense of a separate self. All these fundamental aspects of the brain and body have evolved for us to survive and reproduce, but they cause us to struggle and to suffer. Psychologically speaking, the Buddha would say that we struggle because of ignorance. It's an ignorance or a misunderstanding of the nature of reality, including the nature of ourself. It's just an innocent mistake about the nature of reality and self. Upadana, the Pali word that's generally translated as attachment or clinging, points to this. Clinging occurs when an illusory self creates the illusion of a need through its craving. For example, thinking that I will be happy if I have $100,000 is clinging. Also thinking, well, if I didn't have this big nose, I would be happy. It's more clinging. It is both the pushing away or the grasping that are two sides of clinging. And clinging is simply what I call struggle. It's based on a belief as follows, a belief system as follows. I'm a separate, independent self that finds happiness by getting what it wants, avoiding what it does not want, and I'm fully capable of doing this. Bottom line, it's all about beliefs. We know that we struggle, and we know how this causes suffering. In fact, we'll engage in a variety of activities just to prevent ourselves from struggling. We distract ourselves with drinking and drugs and eating and talking too much, meditating too much even, spiraling down whitewater rivers or watching TV. We basically want a sustained experience of not struggling, and we'll do almost anything for it. Even though we know that we struggle and this causes suffering, we still do it. Struggling just happens, even if we want it to stop. In fact, trying to stop struggling is just more struggling. So given all this, what's the way forward? How do we relate to this inevitable struggling? In my practice, I stopped being concerned about the fact that I was struggling and just began to accept that I struggle. This way, I found I didn't get caught up in denying struggling or judging myself for struggling. I continually noticed struggle taking place and accepted that it was occurring. And guess what? Remember the saying, what you resist persists and even grows? Well, this saying kicked in, and because I was not resisting struggle, it could just kind of fade away on its own. Then I started to wonder why I struggle at all. I mean, there's these biological, evolutionary aspects, but I saw that struggle made me miserable or uneasy. I noticed that when I felt really good that I wasn't struggling, but it wouldn't last long. I would start to struggle again. Even when I got what I wanted, struggle would quickly start up again. I began to explore why I struggle. I noticed that I had moments when non-struggle happened on its own. You remember the examples of sunset, sports, and the baby. I then noticed that in those moments, I was not thinking about myself. Instead of the ego being the center of attention, the yaw or delight or connection was center stage. So this is not a philosophical exploration, as you can probably see. It is directly seeing that in that moment, that your thoughts are not of an I or a me. The awe, delight, or love is center stage. We've had many moments like this, all of us. And yet during these moments, you'll likely find that you quickly begin to struggle again. Human beings just can't dwell in these moments of non-struggle for very long. We quickly bring the I or the me back into the picture and struggling starts up again. Basically, the ego has deep fears about its own demise, and it quickly goes back to its old habitual ways of struggling. The Buddha taught that we do this because we misperceive the nature of self. We think there's an independent, permanent thing called a self. And this misperception is the cause of suffering. So we're back around to this core mistaken belief again, that there is a separate self. Our meditation practice is an invitation to not struggle and to connect with our true nature. As Jon Kabat-Zinn likes to say, there's nothing to do and nowhere to go when we meditate. At times you may find during meditation it's a struggle not to do anything, or you find yourself struggling not to struggle. We're so conditioned to struggle that even when we're sitting with nothing to do, we still struggle. You could be sitting in a meditation in a quiet environment at the ideal temperature with the perfect meditation cushion or chair and still create struggle in your mind. You may find yourself rehashing old stories or judging yourself for having a busy mind. The solution isn't to try to stop doing this. That's just more struggle. The answer is to see how we are misperceiving things. We are not perceiving reality as it actually is. We just don't want to insert new belief systems. In a way, the answer is to have no answer. We suspend our beliefs and ask, what if the way I see myself and the world is not true? When we suspend our beliefs, anything is possible. To relinquish struggle, you must first recognize that most of your suffering is created by you. It is created in the mind and has nothing to do with other people or circumstances and events. When you truly see this, the mind-made perception of a struggling self can just dissolve. You'll realize that painful situations and difficult people are your greatest teachers. In fact, they're key on your path to awakening. Think about it. Without difficulties and pain, I wouldn't be here. Without suffering, you would not be here listening to this talk. Without suffering and difficulties, no one would be interested in what I'm saying here. We can release the energetic hold that our struggling has on the mind through observation, acceptance, and wise reflection, or this kind of investigation. The practice is to be aware of any attachment to a worldly desire. We can ask ourselves, what are the effects of struggling? Is it causing suffering or happiness? We can see this over and over again. We see again and again that struggle creates suffering and doesn't help us in any way. So how do we go about seeing and abandoning struggle? From my practice over the years, I've devised a 7-step process that can kind of evoke this non-struggle or non-clinging. The first thing you have to do is separate the desire from the attachment to what is desired. The second is examine the desire and see how it's related to the arising of feeling tones of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And third, look for signals that you are caught in struggling, such as tension in the body, or an unease, or runaway thoughts. And number 4, investigate the story in the mind that accompanies the struggling. Is it narrow, repetitive? Is it a drain on energy? And 5, notice that your awareness of the struggling is separate from the actual struggling. And 6, accept that struggle has occurred and just let it be. Noticing if there's any aversion to the struggling and even accepting that too. And finally 7, step back from the struggling and sense into awareness, or that which knows that struggling has occurred, and rest there. Rest in awareness. I hope you found this talk helpful in identifying struggling and how we can relinquish struggle. If you enjoyed the talk, please subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you again. Take care and have a great week.